Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Kamini, and I'm your host. My guest today is Carolynn Chalmers. Carolyn is the CEO of the Good Governance Academy, founded by Professor Mervyn King and one of South Africa's leading voices on corporate governance, ethical leadership, and board accountability. She works at the intersection of governance practice and global standard setting, including her leadership roles in ISO governance standards, and has spent decades advising boards on how governance frameworks translate into real world decision making. As King 5 comes into effect, Carolyn brings her expertise on what ethical oversight actually requires of boards, particularly as technology and AI shape risk, responsibility, and power. Carolyn joins us today to explore board responsibility and ethical oversight under the King 5 Code of Governance. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Carmony. It's lovely to be here with you today.
Excellent. Your journey into governance. Carolyn, you started your academic journey in computer science and zoology, and you have an MSc in quantitative research ecology. Not your typical journey into governance.
Not at all.
Can you tell us how you found yourself in governance? You're obviously very fond of the work you're doing. What do you find so exciting about governance?
Thank you so much, Carmony. I sometimes joke that I came to governance the long way around through systems. Computer science taught me how decisions get embedded into processes, and ecology taught me how systems behave over time and how incentives create unintended consequences and how fragile balance can be. And I really found that governance at its best is applied systems thinking. How we design authority, accountability, information flows, and ethical boundaries so that organizations create value without causing harm. I moved into governance because I kept seeing the same patterns over and over. Failures weren't only technical or financial, they were governance failures. People were doing the work, but the system wasn't designed to produce trustworthy outcomes. So in ecology, you learn to respect feedback loops, and governance is full of them. In technology, you learn that you don't specify something, it becomes a default, and it's the same with board oversight. What excites me is that governance is where real power meets real responsibility. It's
I
where
love
we
that.
decide
Real power meets real responsibility. And I particularly love your reference to thinking in ecosystems. And we are at a time where we have to think in systems, particularly in a public crisis era with so many variables. You can't not approach risk management in a siloed fashion anymore, particularly with the variables in an increasingly complex system. Apologies, Carolyn, I interrupted you. Please complete your thought.
No, you're absolutely right. Governance is that operating system for leadership. So real power, real responsibilities, but it's the governance that's the operating system for leadership. And I think that's where we decide what we will optimize for, is in the system, whether it's not just for profit, but legitimacy, trust, resilience, and ethics. And governance is very practical. It shows up in who gets heard, what gets measured, what gets funded, and importantly, what gets stopped. It's very hard, I think, for many governing bodies to actually stop executives, the CEO, from doing something. And that's where the real power comes in. But they obviously need to do that in a very respectful way, having this whole system in place. So when governance is done well, you feel it in the organization's culture, yes, but also those choices, and especially under pressure. So that's why I like to say that governance is actually an operating system for leadership.
I think that ties directly with what I want to ask you next, because you talk about oversight of leadership in terms of a governance operating system and how to enforce. But do you agree that there's a huge trust deficit in the country that we are facing right now?
Absolutely. I think boards are facing a, can we say, credibility moment. Trust in institutions absolutely today is thinner. Stakeholders are less forgiving and risks move faster than our traditional reporting cycles. The two-dimensional, multicolored charts are just not keeping up to pace, up to where we are today. At the same time, our decisions are increasingly shaped by data, platforms, algorithms, and it's these that can create concrete power, but also obscure our accountability. So boards are being asked to do really two things at once. Today in South Africa, to restore legitimacy through their ethical leadership. We've absolutely had that erosion of trust. And secondly, to govern complexity through better information, better oversight, and clearer accountability. That speed with which we are moving now and the data and algorithms and reporting cycles that we had in the past is not keeping up with where we are today. So I think that King 5 arrives at that right moment in this right tension where we have trust, but also speed and increasing geopolitical complexity, let's be honest.
So we talked about restoring this trust deficit. And in South Africa, do you think that justice was done to King 4 in terms of establishing ethical cultures, or did it just become a tick box compliance exercise?
Yeah, unfortunately, King 4 has three very good, the first three principles of King 4 are about ethics. The ethics of the board itself, the ethics of the organization. The board should be setting the culture for the organization so that the organization behaves ethically. And then the organization's behavior in society, which is with this ethical behavior or called corporate citizenship. So the very first three principles of King 4 were about ethical leadership, and still we saw an erosion of ethical leadership in South Africa. Just look at the press around the incidents of bribery, corruption, fraud, etc. So just because you have a code doesn't mean it changes people's behavior. That's why in the governance profession, we are so anti-tick boxing. So the rest of the world, mainly the US, takes a very compliance-based approach to governance. So the Sarbanes-Oxley is written into law. It's very compliance-based. We take a principle-based for exactly that reason. This is not something you can tick off. This is something that you live. So living those first three principles is very important. So King 5 has now emphasized that even further. But again, it is a code. It is a set of principles.
So, Carolyn, for our international listeners as well as our listeners who may not be familiar with the King codes in depth, can you explain what distinguishes King 5 from King 4 in terms of technology and AI? And two, is King 5 positioning technology governance as a strategic leadership duty? And if so, why?
Thanks, Kamini. I think, and this is the difference between, as you mentioned, the international listeners. International listeners are probably looking at the ISO standard, ISO 37000, which doesn't have a technology principle in it, because international consensus was that technology was a utility, like financial and human resource utilities, resources that are used by the organization. Whereas King 5 brings technology very much onto the boardroom table in a South African context. Remember that King 5 and King 4 are for South Africa. So King 5 does bring clarity to technology, data, and AI. And it does emphasize that these are not just merely operational concerns. They do sit inside the governance mandate because they shape risk, performance, and legitimacy. So it is within the construct of King 5, the new approach to governance the system. King 5 explicitly recognizes the pace of technological change and updates the governance expectations in its principle for data, information, and technology. I think it strengthens the show your work expectation through more standardized disclosure. So it really does start enforcing that side of things. The second question, I think, is really around, is King 5 positioning technology as a strategic leadership duty? I think that's what you said, Carolynn. I think yes, because technology now shapes business models and control environments and customer outcomes and societal impacts. We see what Australia is doing with governing just social media, and then I'm sure the next is going to be the impact of AI and social media. If boards govern strategy and risk, they can't treat then AI as a back office tool. The King 5 logic is that if it can have a material effect on the outcomes, the ethical culture, performance of the organization, conformance of the organization, and legitimacy, which are the King 5 governance outcomes, it has to be a board matter. I think that's clear. So that's why it very much has become, technology governance has become a strategic leadership duty for those reasons.
But I think also in terms of viewing technology governance at a board level, the way I view it is just very simply is if you view AI as a tool and an information tool, in order to make strategic business decisions, you need information that is correct. So when you are saying that we want board governance, I think the most important thing is, can you rely on this information? And that comes to the quality of your AI systems, the information that is inputting, and how that information is used, and at what level is it being utilized, as well as being processed. So all of those factors come in to answer, and I'm repeating myself, but simply comes down to the fact that, can I rely on this data to make business decisions? Or do you think it's a simplification of the understanding of that?
It's a problem. And the real problem is opacity. It's opaque in its decision making, in AI applying its decision making to this information. Sure, it's very, very useful. So AI scales decisions instantly, but it's often opaquely. So the impacts can land on people who aren't in the room, customers, employees, communities, through decision making using this information. We don't know the algorithms that have created those the responses. So if we add in on top of that cyber risk, privacy, reputational shock, IT and the use of this information is a risk. So AI must be governed, not as a code, but more as an accountability. So the board is accountable for those outcomes, as I mentioned. And if AI undermines this through its generation of opaque information, so we don't know where this information comes from, we haven't applied our minds on top of it, we can find that it undermines fairness. So top of mind for boards, when you get this information back, sure, you must use AI for decision making, but is it fair? Have you breached privacy in any respect? Does it trigger, for example, regulatory failure or non-compliance? Does it damage trust? So all of those things together is not an IT problem anymore. That is a governance failure. So essentially King 5 is saying, you can delegate tasks, but you can't delegate accountability to AI as well. So yes, you can delegate a task to AI to go and search the internet to give you some answers, but you can't delegate your accountability for the answers that it brings back. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I get you. I wrote an article about this about a year ago, and my concern was about the quality of information. And
Mm.
even before King 5 came out, I was already concerned that boards weren't really taking technology risks seriously enough. So we were at a point a year ago where boards and organizations were saying, "Oh, well, even now, we have to use AI. This is a AI system we're adopting and everybody must use it." And that in itself is fine. But what concerned me more was that even if the board wasn't directly using AI, the information coming to the board packs, we are increasingly being generated using AI.
Yeah.
And we are still not at a maturity level where people are saying, I'm using AI, but I still need to sense check this. So as an accountant or a risk specialist, you would normally look at the number and the figures and think immediately, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't look right. The percentages are off. But this is not happening. So as information moves up the organization, it becomes more dense and more complex. And what's the word you mentioned? Opacity
Mhm.
and more complex. But if the underlying data is wrong, on what basis is the board actually making decisions? And that raises a real governance and risk management question or risk management issue. What are the risk management processes that assure the board that the information it's relying on is actually sound? What do you have to say about that, Karen?
It's such an important point you say, Carolynn, because the board is actually accountable for how management has generated the reports of information that has come to them. So often the board waits for management to come to them to say, this is how we are making sure that our decisions are accurate and the information you get is consistent and transparent. But it's the board's responsibility. The board actually needs to be proactive in going to management to say, look, we understand that AI brings tremendous benefits, but these are the principles we need you to apply. It needs to be proactive, and most boards aren't equipped to do that, which is why this dilemma about boards governing AI. So let's just have a look at where this ethical oversight moves into, let me go all the way back to it's a system. Governance of the decision-making system. Obviously, the decision-making system includes this AI. So practically, what should a board do to make sure that the information that is getting from management is ethical? So first of all, making sure that there is clear purpose and a legitimate use case. So what problem are we trying to solve and for whom? That will give an indication of where the data has come from, for example, breaches of privacy issues, and what is the implication in the use of that information. I think secondly, clear accountability. So who owns the outcomes when the model is wrong? Well, it's the board, and the board needs to delegate that to make sure that those responsibilities are in place. Thirdly, guardrails. We need to understand which decisions cannot be fully automated. And I know that in lots of these credit bureaus and information bureaus, there is a lot of automation. There has to be, just because of the volumes concerned. But there needs to be guardrails. What decisions cannot be fully automated? Where do we have to have the human in the loop? The board needs to be setting this. So let me just do another two that are important for me. First of all, we've mentioned transparency. So what can we explain to people that are affected by the decisions that have been made, just like your customers or even regulators? So a regulator comes back and says, okay, what's the rationale for that decision? You can't go, well, AI said. That's not accountability. And then the last point I want to make is just monitoring. We do get drift, where AI is learning from its hallucination. It's trying to learn from itself. So over time, if we're using the same AI models and we're getting this information coming through board pack after board pack, we are going to get drift. We need to be conscious of drift. Bias. Absolutely have to look at this information critically. Looking at incidents and escalations. All of that is really important from a board perspective. Now, boards generally just read the pack and take it as read and are not used to applying this critical lens. You seem Carolynn. We're not used to interrogating the information. Where does it come from? Why this? What is the rationale? So we need to understand that from a board perspective, our ethical use of information is not just a statement, oh yes, we've used this ethically. It actually is a set of controls. So all of that guidance that I mentioned, but also a new culture in the boardroom of challenging this information, which we haven't had before. We've taken it as read, and then we've challenged the decisions that we've made on top of it. Now we have to challenge the information sources itself.
No, I hear you. It's just sometimes alarming that boards have this perception that this is the AI bus, we have to get on it now. And what happens is, in those circumstances, without those guardrails, without the transparency and clear accountability, no, we are going to use these AI tools. And everyone in the organization must do it. Prior to that, there was this idea of shadow AI, where employees were like, oh, I'm just going to use ChatGPT to do this email for myself. Now, bear in mind, neither the employee nor the board takes it from the perspective that I should not be sharing company information. I should not be sharing personal details. What are the guardrails? Of course, I can use AI to assist me in my work, but there are things that are going to compromise your organizational security, risk management infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So as I'm sitting talking to you here, I haven't maybe it's happening in many organizations, but I haven't heard of organizations saying, yes, we can use a co-pilot or whatever, but just remember, this is how you use it to protect the integrity and the risk management and the reputation of the organization. So there is somebody out there talking about or having a discussion with AI saying, my customer, Jane Smith, ID number, you've revealed this information. I'm so concerned about it. Am I overreacting here?
No, you're not. No, you're not at all. The benefits of AI for an individual employee, for an individual manager, even for an individual director, are overwhelming. And you tend to forget that when you give this information to an AI bot, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it is that you use, you are giving it to the internet. Yes, they say that they're doing this and they say that they're going to keep information private, but no, you are essentially giving it to the internet. You are breaching privacy guardrails if you give this information to the internet to say, use this information and generate, but the benefits are overwhelming. And that's the difficulty. It was like, well, in cybersecurity, that's the issue, isn't it? Where people get caught because you can win this. It just looks, the positives for your own personal gain look overwhelming, and that's what they play on. And that is AI. AI is personally overwhelming in the benefits that it can be providing you. But we do need to have then as a corporate these guardrails, and whether it's technologically enabled, like you cannot access, or whether you're given and perhaps it's both, an internal tool that is as effective, but the information isn't disclosed to the internet. So there is a solution called Claude with a P, where it is kept internal to yourself. It's an individual device, which actually does keep that information internal as opposed to providing it to the internet. So we need to be very careful of that. So I just want to mention some other concerns around this. We need to be careful of confusing vendor assurance. So ChatGPT saying to us, look, we're not going to use this on the internet, with board assurance. So when the supplier says it's fine, that's not governance. We need to make sure, because we're accountable. The other one is reducing ethics to bias only. It's not about overseeing and looking at bias, exactly as you pointed out, Carolynn. It includes putting confidential documents into ChatGPT. It includes ChatGPT coming back because you've asked it to manipulate the answer. Make this more conversational. Turn these bullet points into a narrative. You are manipulating. You are getting information from the internet and adding it in. That's not the information that you provided it initially. Think about things like exclusion, but don't say this and include this. It's manipulation again. What about safety? What about power? And then just little things like, I have a habit of saying, please can you? Those are 3 words it doesn't need. Every time I ask it those 3 words, it is parsing those 3 words. Those 3 words add up to power, to a carbon footprint. We don't even think about that. So ethics is downstream. It's not only about testing your deployment, it's about our design choices up front. So it's as you say, Carolynn, it's quite a complex environment, and we do need to make sure that our boards are equipped to dealing with this complexity of thinking.
I'm smiling here because when you said, please tell me whatever, and my flaw is at the end of it, I said, thank you so much.
Yes, this is great, because you're so excited. Well, let's take this carbon footprint we need to think about.
Yeah, but the thing is, we don't talk about these issues. We're still in the very excited phase where we think that it's a competitive advantage to get all our employees to use AI. And we are not thinking in terms of what it is doing to our ability to think critically. Instead of me sitting, and I'm terrible at Excel, instead of me sitting with an Excel, upload the details, upload all of this wonderful data that can be sold to anybody out there. But I'm telling the internet or AI, here's this Excel spreadsheet with all our details, and I want this to be manipulated in a certain way. But nobody has told me, and I'm just an ordinary employee, nobody has told me, have you disabled X, Y, and Z? Have you removed the customer name? Have you removed the personal details? And please note, in South Africa, Poppy, in terms of the following, and we're not having these conversations because I think that we're so caught up in the hype already. And as you said and correctly said, and I am guilty of it as well, it's so easy. It's so easy.
It is. You click that plus button and you load up your spreadsheet. So I think this is a very important point, is that governance failure, that is actually a failure of governance. And it's being framed as a capability gap. Actually, we're using AI to fill a capability gap. Just because you're not proficient to the nth degree in Excel to be able to deal with this complexity, you're using the tool, and that brings a capability that the organization didn't have. That's actually a governance failure. Boards govern complex things all the time, like finance and derivatives and safety and clinical risk. Let's just go into the health space, which we haven't even spoken about. And they do this. They want you, Carolynn, to use that spreadsheet and to give us peer reporting, controls, independent assurance. But AI is, if you're using AI, you are being driven to use AI because of the capability gap. And it is something similar when we are governing those complex issues. We need to be governing AI in the same way. When you're facing important things like privacy, security, intellectual property, clinical risk that's going to health, boards must be governing AI in the same way at that level of risk for the organization. The board's job is to make that complexity governable by putting the parameters in place, making sure that through our policies we are mandating clarity of which tool do you use, what settings should you be putting on and off. Now, the board doesn't tell you what settings, the board directs that the executive management provides you with that guidance. Controls, that's absolutely on controls. And then evidencing standards. What standards of behavior are you being held to? Are you putting in place? What are the decision thresholds? Yes, if it's something that's not including private information and you just want to total up and it's all anonymous data, that's a low threshold. Yes, go for it. That gives us capability to the organization. But if you are dealing with client information, health information, absolutely not. That's a threshold that's being breached. And let's just have a look at the consequences to an organization when you are doing this, using AI as a capability in the organization, which is great, but then it breaches compliance requirements. It becomes a non-compliance issue. That could lead to the organization losing its license to operate, meaning everybody is without a job. The organization gets closed down. It loses its license to operate. So as, what was it, Spider-Man's grandfather said, with great power comes great responsibility. Absolutely. When something's too easy to use, there's always a catch.
Absolutely. But you raised all these issues in my mind, and I'm just thinking about my sister now because she's an accountant, and part of her job is not to, obviously look at the figures and everything, but look at the figures and extrapolate findings based on the operating environment. And we're not quite at the stage where AI can do that without prompts. But she was explaining to me a certain thing, and I was saying what concerned me was we are actually outsourcing our ability to think critically to AI. And I'm not talking about simple emails or things like that. I'm talking about looking at a set of figures and being able to look at the percentages or the variances and say, I know why this is happening in the organization because of X, Y, Z. Are we losing our ability to analyze information correctly? And should this trend be, should we be pushing this trend? I know it's inevitable, but how can we actually manage this without losing our own cognitive ability to do so?
And I'm going to take again a governance perspective on this. So you have this problem as an individual in an organization, is whether you worried about, am I losing my ability to make substantive decisions based on my own cognitive thinking and not just using AI to quickly get it out? That's your sister, as you give a very good example, but can you multiply that and think about everybody in the organization then? What about the organization? Is the organization as a whole making substantive decisions, or is our governance of this AI substantive? Are we actually having an impact so that you are able to correctly discern when something is your cognitive ability, and we don't reduce that because we employed you as an expert in your profession? So we employed your sister, for example, as an expert in accounting. We didn't deploy a tool. We didn't want that tool. We wanted her cognitive ability as a human. That's why we employed her. So we need to have the right governance, and we need to make sure that that governance is about the substantive matters and not just about the performance of it. So rather just looking at what decisions are we delegating to AI, and like decisions about customer accounts, rather look as well as what are prohibited. We need to look at that prohibitive side of things, the substantive governance, not just performance, delegating to AI to get good performance. Looking at who's accountable, not just for using the tool, for the deployment of the tool, but for the outcomes of the use of that tool. As you say, reduction in use of cognitive ability. What evidence did we require before using that answer, like testing, bias, privacy, security, impact, lots of things involved in, do we require that evidence before, as part of the rationale, before using that decision? What are the live controls and monitoring triggers? What happens when they trip, when those triggers trip? Is somebody there when you go, oh, hang on, I just sent that out. What is your recall ability? We are moving too fast. So in the old days when we used to send our letters, and this is way before your time, Carmony, send our letters to the typing pool, you'd wait a week for your letter to come out, or if you were lucky with, a couple of hours. Today we can reply to all instantly. So it's the same with our decision making. We can use AI, come up with an answer and send it out, and it can have tremendous implications. If we say, oh, I didn't apply my mind to that, what happens when you trip that trigger? How can you recall this information? How can you make good? And then once you've had that issue, and we've started seeing it obviously in cybersecurity incidents, but now in AI, can we explain the decision to the person that was affected in plain language so that they understand what happened? They really understand, not gobbledygook technology speak. And then what is our incident playbook in the organization? So when does the board get notified? Now, these are all things that are just about your your 1 point about your sister being an accountant, applying her mind as opposed to just using the AI. All of those are very important questions that the board needs to have answered to put the guardrails in place so that the whole organization doesn't end up with the same concerns that you've just raised.
You've already answered a lot of my next question, which is AI risk and controls, because AI spans bias, security, data quality, operational failure, reputational damage. And my question to you is, AI risks make me nervous. I'm not sure that the existing risk frameworks are fit for purpose when it comes to AI risks. So what changes or doesn't change from traditional IT risk governance? Carolynn, are organizations underestimating certain risks? What's your view on that?
You're right, Carmony. The risk profile has changed phenomenally, exponentially in the last decade. Let's just look, it's not just AI risk and technology risk. We had a hint of that with cybersecurity risk coming through, privacy risk coming through. AI risk adds to that. But let's just look at sustainability risk. Dealing with fires in Western Cape at the moment in the summer season, there are fires everywhere and people are having to evacuate. Look at the ecological issue we had yesterday in Epping, in Western Cape, just outside Cape Town, where we had a chemical spill and people had to evacuate. Businesses, Epping, Montague Gardens is the hub of business. It's a micro enterprise, a business area. Now businesses had to stop. All of these risks are escalating. So we can't have overall the traditional way we did risk management. It has to change. Now, AI in that context is not its own risk island. It must be integrated into this changing enterprise risk framework. So it's not AI risk that's causing this. In fact, it's overarching enterprise risk. Just have a look at operational risk. At the moment, we're getting operational risk model failures because of all of this uncertainty coming through that we've never really dealt with before. We've got, and let's apply that to AI. Of course, we've got the drift, we've got the resilience, we've got various things involved that we've spoken about before, as you mentioned. Look at compliance and legal risk. That is changing tremendously as well, bringing in now sustainability compliance requirements on sustainability reporting. Of course, we have cyber and data risk. Look at poisoning of data, intentional poisoning of data, so that the data comes into the organization and is being generated. It is using that data to generate incorrect answers. So there is this legitimate poisoning of data in the organization. And of course, there's data breaches. Looking at, well, people, individuals' conduct, and then the organizational reputation as a result, manipulation, unfair outcomes. So there's lots and lots of issues that are not only AI related, that are also related to the changing context within an organization operates. So yes, AI is not a risk island. It has to be embedded in this changing enterprise risk management. So AI does have different board threshold, what requires board approval, what requires independent review or external assurance. Yes, that is what is coming through as AI is being differentiated. But the enterprise risk management is changing not only because of AI, because of multiple factors.
I hear you. And part of the problem is that we've been content, or it was fit for purpose for so long. We've got risk management professionals with their master's degree in risk management and confidently saying we have, these models are we've been using it for years and years and years. And what I tutor risk and crisis management for executives. And one thing I raise again and again, I am not saying it's obsolete, those risk management models. What I am saying is that you need to sit and with intentionality ask yourself, is it fit for purpose right now? And in terms of asking that question, the thing is, you have to understand the operating environment, which is your VUCA, your Barney, hyper-innovation, polycrisis, pulling all that together and asking yourself, at the end of the day, what do we want to identify as a risk? How do we want to mitigate it? And are we hearing that those weak signals that come through in a polycrisis environment? And that's the starting point of asking, is this fit for purpose?
Absolutely. Such a good point. So we have been almost become complacent. So risk management has become this, it's like quality management. This is what you need to do for quality. Let's move forward. Actually, it changes significantly. So yes, we still need controls, accountability, segregation of duties, our incident response management, we still need assurance. Those are traditional things that, yes, standardized best practice. What we have with this changing world, as you've pointed out, and specifically AI, is it's probabilistic. So it brings that uncertainty factor. It evolves rapidly over time. Like we're starting to see the impact of climate, not just these, rain bombs, but it's happening more frequently. So it's evolving. This landscape is evolving very quickly. We need stronger monitoring. We need a model of management on top of it that can handle these uncertainties. But I think importantly, we need impact thinking. So what I've started asking, I'm involved in quite a few audit committees as I bring the IT governance expertise into audit committees. And what I've started talking to them about is in risk management, you can't just give me a two-dimensional table. I need to understand the time frames. In what time frame do you think this risk will materialize as being a high risk as opposed to where we are today as a low risk? Can it happen in an immediate time frame? Can it happen? So what are the propensity for it to happen, and in what time frame? You've done this risk assessment over so many years, but what is the risk assessment? What does it look like over this period or over this period? So that, we used to have incidents in 100 years or incidents in 10 years. We can't deal with that level anymore. We need to make this three-dimensional, if that makes sense. So there is a change in that enterprise risk management that has shifted from best practice, adding on to that, saying we have to deal with these impact thinking, stronger monitoring, dealing with models of management on top of it.
I think from my work, I've noticed also that sometimes the issue is that people are scared to send off those risk reports to the board, and it's red in terms of your RAG status. And in our current operating environment, you need to get the board to see that information. Before it was a case of, oh, we have to mitigate this, and you put into mitigation plans, blah blah blah, and it goes and it's maybe orange and it's not so bad. But those are signals for the board to take into account, to perhaps leverage for the organization. That's one of the issues. The other issue that I've seen cropping up recently is that the inability, or maybe it's a lack of understanding of how aggregated risk surfaces in this particular environment. So we are talking about something that directly threatens the sustainability of the organization. So you are pulling all these weak signals, and some of them don't land on your risk register, but cumulatively, when you pull all these things together in terms of your aggregated risk, you're going to sink. How can we actually educate about this particular problem?
You've raised 3 points there that I'd like to just touch on. The one is, are we underestimating certain risks? Just because of the nature, it's gone to orange. So are we actually underestimating that? The other one is, collectively, is it changing the materiality for the organization? And then maybe we can go in later, exactly which harms for the organization are we not prepared to look at? So if I could just start with the first one, are we underestimating certain risks? And I'm going to take some AI examples. So first of all, AI model drift. It was safe when we started using it, but if everybody is using it in the organization, is it still safe? So as you say, yes, we've pulled it down to an orange, but if everybody's doing it, is it still orange? So if we just look at the global financial crisis of 2008, and we look at the credit and the credit scoring in the United States, yes, one bank was doing it, but if everybody did it, is it going to pull down the whole system? So AI model drift. The other one is data provenance. Where does the data come from? Was it lawfully and appropriately brought into the system? So yes, maybe we're giving the AI we pull the controls in, you can't put private information, it is a closed environment. But what happens when we start doing that at scale and we start bringing in other data sources that we haven't pre-vetted? What about third-party dependency? Now we're dependent on ChatGPT for our organization, but what happens if ChatGPT is suddenly not available? Well, they don't say that they're going to be available 24/7, 365. So how are we going to manage that? And also, we can't outsource the responsibility for those decisions to this vendor. And what about the reputational shock, which we've mentioned before? When public trust collapses, when it collapses faster than our internal ability to do any kind of remediation. So again, it all talks to that. We've got controls, we say it's green, but actually, given this complex, rapidly changing environment, shouldn't we recognize that it was originally red, and is it only assurance that can test the controls, or is there something else that we need to be thinking of in terms of this assurance? So underestimating certain risks with AI, absolutely, I think we need to be careful of that. Now, moving into materiality, absolutely, the impact materiality of AI around is different from where we traditionally looked at materiality. It does expand our lens. It must expand our lens from financial materiality to the company to material impacts on people and society. And hasn't that what integrated reporting done, for example? Is we say integrated reporting is sitting under, and I'm pivoting completely, is sitting under the IFRS lens. Integrated reporting's moved from the International Integrated Reporting Council into IFRS, which tends to think about it putting in financial lens on it. But materiality today can't only be about the impact on the financials of the organization. It has to be broader, and AI highlights this, that material impacts on people and society in the use of AI is significant. They are material. Stakeholders need to know about that. So for AI, it means that the boards ask, not only does this improve our efficiency, but what harms can it do at scale? The organization can do harm at scale. So it pushes us to govern not only where we are in terms of our operational efficiencies, but also our externalities. So thinking about fairness, access, dignity, safety, as you've mentioned, those impacts eventually become the organizational impacts to the governance outcomes, legitimacy, trust, transparency. So not only performance, conformance, and then ultimately license to operate issues. This is a big deal. And I think boards are moving to understanding that the big deal is not about whether they can use AI or not, but what the implications of the use of AI are for the organization, specifically at scale.
Carolyn, King 5 recognizes that organizations operate at very different levels of governance maturity. So, in your opinion, what does responsible AI governance look like in organizations that are still building foundational governance capacity? And more importantly for me is where do boards go wrong by adopting advanced frameworks faster than their culture or systems can sustain? Because I've seen this with digital culture implementation.
Absolutely. Very, very important question. So appropriate governance for your level of maturity in the organization. I've been working now for the last couple of years on a governance maturity model in ISO. It's the only international standard for assessment of governance at the moment. So ISO 37004 is a governance maturity model. And what that looks at is what is the right level of governance, what are the frameworks, etc., that you should be using at different levels of governance.
You were saying that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that AI is not risky because it's AI. You're saying it's risky because of what it does to people and systems. And that's why it's a material risk, not an IT risk. So in plain language, the information looks wrong, or looks authoritative, not wrong, but it's wrong and biased and hallucinated, and people trust it anyway. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. So we don't necessarily have the controls in place, the practicalities of what to do when. And because this risk environment is changing so rapidly, the ability for organizational stakeholders, employees, vendors, customers to actually deal with any fallout of the risk of using AI is problematic. We saw it with the emergence of cybersecurity risk. We saw that there was the need to what happens if I have clicked on this and it's caused a cybersecurity incident. Now, in AI, it's far more subtle because you only realize after the fact that it's given an answer necessary. You perhaps only realize after the fact that it's given this answer and it's caused a change in behavior. It's caused a change, a shift in organizational operations. What do we do with that? It's not just an instant, here's the risk, your systems get shut down, have to pay a ransom, very, very instant. What happens if you cause more of a longer term shift? So we need to understand that what we're dealing with here is that we're dealing with, perhaps let me move into governance fatigue, if I can. And because that is very much aligned with what we're talking about, is that we are governing risk from a kind of an instant response when it comes to cybersecurity. Now we're governing a risk which impacts culture, impacts cognitive ability and intellectual property of the organization. So let's just unpack that a little bit. And now governance is the board is trying to balance all of these things to make sure that when it's governing the organization's risk, yes, the risk managers are having to juggle these, and sure, they're going to have professional guidance in terms of their need to govern this, but what does the board do? So we've got an issue here where the board is actually becoming tired. There is a fatigue around governing this, and then governing now it's new laws coming through. Then we've got cybersecurity matters. Now we've got sustainability reporting, and now we've got AI, and all different ways of having to govern risk. So if I can just round off and say, let's bring it back to King 5. King 5 has the opportunity to help boards integrate this collectively so that we do have a framework, so that it isn't treated separately, that we can reduce fragmentation around all of this different risk, that we don't treat AI as the checklist. Because if we treat it as governing the risk of AI, governing the risk of cybersecurity, governing the risk of sustainability, we do increase this governance fatigue.
I get what you're saying. Thank you for that. An area that I'm very interested in is techno-colonialism in the context of the global South. And I'd like your views on what responsibility do South African boards have under King 5 to ensure that technology governance is context aware rather than imported wholesales. Are there risks in uncritically adopting international AI frameworks without grounding them in local governance realities?
Absolutely. This is a big one because we tend to take on these international frameworks. And in South Africa, we have a particular requirement. So South Africa has distinct inequality dynamics. Africa has distinct inequality dynamics. And we have service delivery realities. We certainly look at all of these investigations, we have a trust deficits. So AI can exacerbate that. It can either widen these gaps or, when used appropriately, can help close them. So boards need to be contextually aware. We need to understand our local context. We need to look at, when we provide guidance, especially when we are a board of a multinational, that we do take into account the application of the policies, the principles that we are asking the organization to apply in the regional and national imperatives. So if we think about, and I'm just going to use a governance theory, the difference between ISO 37000, which is the corporate governance standard, international standard, with King 4 and King 5, is that King 4 and King 5 have brought in local national imperatives. Remuneration, for example, is an entire principle in our King reports. It is not a principle at international level because the Gini coefficient is an important issue in South Africa. We have the highest Gini coefficient in the world. Likewise, when it comes to AI, we need to think about these distinct national requirements, and we need to make sure that that local context is built into our risk assessments, our stakeholder impact assessments. Language accessibility, 11 official languages. It's not like we're in the UK or in Europe. We have 11 official languages, and we need to make sure that we also have redress mechanisms where there have been impacts of a national nature. And at a multinational company perspective, that local context must be built into our risk registers. Are we just, as the mothership from South Africa, applying the same risk registers at a board level to every single organization operating in every national jurisdiction? We cannot afford to do that because that is not appropriate, and it is exacerbated when it comes to AI because our decision making becomes so much more powerful, bringing in the national context and applying international context to national context. So very, very important point you make there, Carolynn.
I wish I had an hour more because this issue is so important that you're talking about is localization, indigenization, and making sure that your risks are context aware. And you see boards defaulting to best practice. What is the benchmark? And it drives me crazy because the technology is new, evolving, and people ask for, they default to the benchmarking and best practice. And I want to tell them it doesn't make sense in this context if you apply your mind to it.
Or do that. And so, yes, our paper compliance with international standards. Yes, that does give us a level of international comparability, but it doesn't always match our operational realities. So it's almost it's an and. Yes, it does bring us something, but it doesn't translate into our organizational realities, our actual data conditions, our customer realities, our legal environment, and our national capacity and our organizational capacity. So while these global principles are absolutely useful, governance must land locally. It must be company and regionally and nationally applicable, must land locally.
Carolynn, how should boards be building their own capabilities for ethical oversight of AI? And what role does education, composition, and board culture play beyond technical literacy? And when I think about this question, I think about diversity. Would you agree with that perspective?
Absolutely. We have to be careful that if we start adding people to the board and we start adding, okay, now here's our data officer as a board member, or we have a board member that is information aware, has got a skill in information, or has a skill in cybersecurity, or has a skill in sustainability, or has a skill in AI. There are all of these factors now that are impacting an organization's core competencies. So it used to be, and let me be a bit controversial, it used to be that the retired audit partners became board members because it was all about financials. Now we're finding it has to be that the diversity of skills on a board is so much more. But if we were to add every skill to the board, our boards would have to be huge. Risk skill, a compliance skill, this skill or that skill. So what we're starting to see is the rise of independent committee members like myself. I find that I'm often appointed as an independent committee member. I sit at a committee level, not at the board, bridging the gap between the board and management. And we can delve into the subject area at a lot more detail, which becomes more practical. So we don't always have to find that we appoint the expertise or the skill set at the board level. We can also appoint them at a committee level and still get that insight into the board. And if the board has a particularly difficult decision to make, why don't they invite that independent committee member to that particular discussion? So there are ways of doing it that are emerging. So there is recognition that it's happening. I just want to give you a really nice story. In the Good Governance Academy last year, we ran a series where I asked Prof. King a series of questions about being the chairman of a board. And I said to Prof. King, all right, we got this diversity of skills on the board. How does it actually work? Do we leave the decision on AI to the person who's the technology representative on the board? And he said, absolutely not. When you make a decision as a board, it's a board decision, a whole board decision. So how do we do that? So he gave fantastic guidance. He said, first of all, yes, that person has the skill set. So before you come to the board, that person is expected to have interrogated the management's report on technology, on AI, at a deeper level than anybody else, because they have that skill set. Then when they come to the board as chairperson, says Prof. King, I will ask Carolynn, as being the technology representative, Carolynn, not the chief information officer or the chief technology officer, Carolynn, explain to the board the decision that we are debating now and the information that is management has brought to the table. You as a board member, explain it, present it to the board. Interesting take on it, isn't it? It's not management explaining. Now you have the board member explaining. That means I need to know this really well. And I need to have done my homework and engaged with management so that I can present to the board. And I will be presenting at a board level now. Isn't that interesting? Because I've put my own interpretation on it. Then once the board has made its decision and there's been deliberations, then Prof. King would not ask Carolynn for the recommended decision. Prof. King will ask somebody else, like the finance skilled person or whoever it is that's not skilled in technology, to then explain, right, we've made this decision now, Carmony, explain why the board has made that decision. Now the whole board becomes accountable because you might be asked to explain why the decision was made about this very technical matter. Isn't that a clever technique?
Very clever technique, Carolynn. But then you are telling board members you need to buck up and not spend an hour in the morning having breakfast and reading the board report before the meeting. You need to actually apply your mind for about 6 to 8 hours and understand the details of it, because you might be questions, and if you don't want to be at that board meeting and the chairperson goes on, yes, but drilling down, what do you think? And then you're going to be exposed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So as we wrap up, I just got one final question for you, Carolynn. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading? I have lots of books that I read. I have a whole pile, but let me just have a look in terms of nonfiction. Governance and practice. I'm reading quite a lot around AI governance and assurance. So how organization evidence controls and accountability for AI, and that's not written in books. This is changing so rapidly. This is information that you need to be aware of what is in the news. I need to be understanding who's writing what papers. I have to be discerning in terms of where I find that source of paper. When it comes to a local and versus a global lens, I like to look at global South realities, specifically implementation issues. So I look at where there have been problems, and then I myself look at what would I do. I ask myself, what would Carolynn do if I was a board member in that scenario? And then I would go and research it. So it's a bit of interactive learning as opposed to just reading. So I tend to read a mix of, obviously I have to read for my governance standards work. I have to read because I'm an advisor, so I need to keep up to date. And then obviously I have to read on the subject matters that are in my swim lane in technology. But for relaxation, I read fiction. And specifically, and I'm the classic, older female. I look at detective stories, I look at mysteries, I want to solve problems. So not only do I solve problems and I challenge myself when it comes to the non-fiction, I also like to challenge myself when it comes to detective stories. So that's what I spent this holiday season reading, was the non-fiction from specific, whodunit, in terms of if I was a board member and this governance failure or this IT failure, to whodunit in my fictional reading. Thanks.
Thanks, Carolyn. Just quickly, because we have run out of time, I want to ask you. I sometimes get overwhelmed because of the space that we are in by the information. How are you discerning to say, I've only got an X amount of time to apply my mind to new developments, but the amount of information out there sometimes feels overwhelming. How do you actually fight that feeling of FOMO, fear of missing out on something? How do you manage that?
Okay, first of all, I am very discerning when I look at social media. I am very worried about the algorithms pushing us all into little bubbles. So there might be lots and lots and lots of information, but just realize when you doom scrolling, you are in your own little bubble. Just because you looked at something or you paused on something means that you're going to get more information on that. I tend to do my own searches. I search, first of all, my trusted places. I have a list of trusted. I will not finish the day. I will even do it in bed if I haven't looked at certain trusted sources. This is my go-to. I will always look at, and news, for example, I will always look at a combination of news as it's news headlines. I will not only look at BBC or CNN. I will always go to Al Jazeera and all sorts of other news outlets and look at the top news. I will always look at news out of the East. I will not only look at news out of the West. Otherwise, we are living in a bubble. And that's not news. That's a bubble perspective. Then when it comes to the actual issues of what I'm dealing with in my professional life, I will also go and search. I won't just look at what's sitting on my news feed in LinkedIn or Instagram. I will go and search. And I will look and not only use a Gemini search or an AI type of chat GPT kind of search, what's topical today. I will actually go and put my own searches in. Now, I know that that's not foolproof, and I know that it's really important to also go to conferences. Conferences have a place, even if it's online conferences where there are ability to do offline out of conference discussions with others. The chat function on a webinar is a very important place to be. You need to get individual humans' perspectives and understand where they come from. It's easier to understand where they come from than when a social media bubble comes from. So very important points from my perspective in terms of where I find my information.
Thanks for that, Carolyn. Very, very practical advice. As we end, Carolyn, thank you so much for such a thoughtful and grounded conversation. And you've reminded us that under King 5, governance is not about control for its own sake, but about responsibility, accountability, and most importantly, from my perspective, ethical courage, especially in the face of powerful technologies. Thank you so much for joining me on AI Ethics Navigator, and I so appreciate the time you made to be here.
Thank you, Kamini. I've really appreciated this time and such thought-provoking questions. Not something that I could answer everything on. Not one person knows the answer to all of these questions. They really are existential questions. Thank you for your podcast series. It is very important, and I really am going to promote it. Thanks, Kamini.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.